Welcome to the American Small Business League podcast with Lloyd Chapman and Bruce DeTorres. And with us today is Jenn Brothers running for Congress in Pennsylvania. Jenn, how are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Great.
Good.
Well,
Let me start off with my small business data that I always say, right? I asked Bruce the other day, I said, Bruce, what percentage of people running for Congress know that 99.9% of U.S. firms are small business? He said, very, very few. So this is U.S. Census Bureau data. 99.9% of all U.S. firms are small businesses. They create 90% of net new jobs. They generate half the gross domestic product, half the private sector workforce. About 97% of U.S. exporters are small businesses. And nobody knows. And the only agency to support those 34 million small businesses is the Small Business Administration. The largest economic stimulus program for the American people in history is the Small Business Act. And that law in 2025 mandates that a minimum of 23% of all federal contracts go to small businesses. And about 15 years ago, the Senate Small Business Committee put out a report says for every 1% federal contracts of small businesses go up, it creates 100,000 jobs annually. So the law says small businesses should get 23%. I've been suing the government for 40 years. I've won about 110 lawsuits. By the way, my win ratio over the last 40 years is 98.5%, which is impossible. And I would say with everything I've seen and the federal investigations that have been conducted, small businesses, I'll say legitimate small businesses with 100 employees or less probably get 3% of all federal contracts. So 99.9% of all U.S. firms are small businesses. That means only 1/10 to 1% are large businesses. And all my research and federal investigations and studies I've seen is that the 99.9% are getting around 3% of the contracts, and the 1/10 to 1% are getting, 97%. And I guess there's something else that nobody knows. Jen, your entire life, every year you've been alive, over 95% of all federal contracts with the companies owned by men. And that women-owned small businesses, even though women are half the population, and they own 42% of businesses, women have never come close to getting 5% of all federal contracts, right? So I always spew that out every time I talk to somebody, right? But
yeah.
had you ever heard of that information before, Jen?
I actually did know a majority of that information,
Good.
but
That's
also
why we need you in
not
Congress.
for this.
That
But
puts you in the top 1% of people running for Congress today.
yeah, so before coming onto this call, I did some research, and if we were to reduce the definition from the 500 employees to 100 employees, like we're trying, if we reduce that, it changes the percentage of small businesses to what, like 97%. So it's only a 3% difference to remove bad actors, to remove people that shouldn't be there anyway, that are gaming the system. So yeah, that it's pretty essential to reduce that number, just by definition's sake.
Yeah. I have never seen, I'm 75, and I've never seen anyone run for Congress as a small business advocate, which is surprising. Most Americans either own or work in a small business, most of them, right? And so to be, being a small business advocate is like a no-brainer. Who's going to not vote for you because you're pro small business, right?
And
But
is build communities. Not
yeah,
only do they build communities, but small businesses will impact your ability to reduce crime. So the more small businesses that you have, the less crime you have, because
yeah.
they're places for people to go to.
I'll
Jenn,
tell you something. I'm going to give you a economic stimulus plan that should win us the Nobel Prize in economics. So let's see now. So the Senate Small Business Committee says for every 1% contracts of small business go up, it creates 100,000 jobs, right? Um, Small business by law are supposed to get 23%. Looks like they're getting 3%. And that's pretty solid. If you consider 98% of all U.S. firms have 100 employees or less, 87% have 20 employees or less, and the average American company has 10 employees. So 100 employees would be the highest number you could use to say it's a small business. The government says 2,000, which is just ridiculous. When the average American company has 10 employees, the government says you can have up to 2,000 employees. That's just absurd, right?
Yeah.
But if the federal government were to give the full 23% of all federal contracts to legitimate small businesses with 100 employees or less, that would create 2 million new jobs a year for free, no new taxes, no new spending, deficit neutral. And that would be about a 100% increase on the number of jobs that are created on an annual basis in America. That would be the most powerful, significant economic stimulus program in the history of America. Now let's look at women. They're half the population. Excuse me. They own 42% of the business. So they're getting 5%. What if we gave women 10% or 50, let's say 15%? They're half the population. Let's give them 15%. That's another 10%. That's another million jobs. So just by giving legitimate small businesses what the law has required for decades, and then give women a more equitable share, which I'll say is 15%, that's 3 million new jobs a year.
Yeah.
That would be huge. That would be huge. The stock market rises and falls on minor fluctuations in the monthly jobs report. The fluctuations in the jobs report are like 5 or 10%. And I hear that even international markets rise and fall on the jobs report. The jobs report is considered the strength of the U.S. economy. But imagine if we went from creating 2 million jobs to 5 million new jobs.
And
I would imagine.
we need those.
Yeah.
The people
Yeah.
in these areas, like mine, we need work.
Absolutely. Well, it would increase tax revenue dramatically. It would
Mhm.
cut unemployment dramatically,
Mhm.
and it'd just be a win-win. But I've been fighting the government for 40 years. By the way, I've been fighting the government for 40 years to stop giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. 40 years I've been working on that.
Well, now we're going to work together. So,
I'll show you something funny. I show this almost every podcast I do. Um, a few years ago, the Pentagon came out and says that they were giving small businesses 20% of all federal contracts, 23%. And I said, can I see who you're giving those contracts to? They said, no, you can't. So under the Freedom of Information, I sued them. I spent $900,000 in 7 years in court. I simply said, can I see you giving small business contracts to? And this is what I got. I got about 20 pages of this.
And for the audio listeners, Lloyd's holding up about 7 or 8 pages that are completely blacked out and redacted. Just big black blocks on every
Yeah.
single sheet of paper.
They won't even, they won't tell you anything. They won't tell you anything at all. So why is the United States government
transparency
ashamed
to
of who they
corruption.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that we're transparent in these things. It's not like we're giving out the company's EIN number. We're not giving out anybody's social.
Right.
It is just a company name. Like, this is insanity.
I'll tell you something. But before I uncovered this around 2000, all this information was on the internet. That was a long time ago. That was 25 years ago. So 25 years ago, who got contracts, how much they got was just out there. And then when I exposed the fact that most of the money was going to Fortune 500 firms, they shut it all down. Now it's top secret, right? But we need people like you, Jen, in Congress that are pro small business. And you're running against a Republican, right?
I'm running against Republican Dan Muser. He owns a business called Pride Mobility.
And Jen, maybe we could start, Jen, just by hearing your brief bio and why you want to run for off Congress in your district. Just give us the basics, please, for now, and then we'll dig into everything.
Absolutely. I am Jenn Brothers. I have worked in various fields, right? I've worked in higher education, banking, as a correctional officer at a jail or at a police department. And more recently, I was a private investigator. I have degrees in criminal justice and political science. I've also been an entrepreneur. My ex-husband and I owned a business together, and I owned a separate business at one point in my life. So I've owned small businesses. I've also worked in small businesses. Prior to banking, I actually worked at a putt-putt golf course and a restaurant. I quickly became management at both. I also went from the the restaurant that I worked at, I went to work for one of their other businesses. The same couple owned another business. It was a NASCAR race shop. So I've been in various fields, and I've done a lot of stuff. I'm also a member of the LGBTQIA plus. I am also a mother, and I'm a rape survivor. So I have some real world experience that I'm bringing to the table with my run for Congress. And really, a lot of what I'm bringing is heart. Now, why am I running? Well, I have the foundation of education. So I have that background. I have a political science degree, as I mentioned. In addition to that, I have real world work experience. I've worked in various sectors, so I can utilize that and bring that across any policies that we have to have mindful change. You know, you can't just go in and slash things. You can't just go in with a chainsaw. You have to actually have real people in mind. And that brings me around to really the reason why I'm running is because I moved to Pennsylvania. Once I moved to Pennsylvania, I've lived in other states. I've seen struggle in other states, but I really see struggle here. My neighbors go daily without food. We have several people that have gone without water in their homes. And even I was impacted by that at one point. Our well went out and our well company went out of business. It was a small business. It went out of business because of funding. It didn't have enough money to survive. And what happened was I went 6 months without running water in my home, and
Wow.
I had to learn myself how to build a well pump, how to make all those pieces and parts go together and make the water come out of the ground, which is not an easy feat, but I did that on
No.
my own. And other people don't have the same skill set that I have. They don't have the varied background. One of my grandfathers he owned a construction company. So I did have a little bit of that knowledge that I could pull out. I had another grandfather that he was a farmer. Well, aside from being in the army, he was a farmer. So I have these real skills that I can bring to the table, but not everybody has that, and they don't all have the resources. And it's going to take a literal act of Congress to bring resources to this area, to bring funding to what we need to grow our communities, to grow our small businesses, to make sure people can eat, have housing, have adequate access to water. It's going to take an act of Congress. And I felt the need so much so that I'm blowing up my career as a private investigator to do this because it is that important. It is that important to have someone here that cares about the people enough that they're going to advocate for needs.
You're in the ninth district. What major towns are in your district?
Major towns don't exist here. I
All
have
right.
Pennsylvania. Reading is one of my major towns. Bloomsburg State College is in so where Penn State is,
Mhm.
my district. And up where I am in my county, my closest town is I'm in between Tunkhannock and Montrose.
Great, because as we spread this video around and as you do too, it's great to hear those things so folks in those areas know, like, oh, she could work for me. You could be my representative if they're in those areas. So thank you.
I want their representative. I
Yeah.
want to go to I want to go to be able to go to Todd's restaurant and have a meal with you. Okay, like
Right, right. And
No.
your website where people can learn about you is JennBrothersForCongress.com.
yes. So that's Jen with two N's, JENN, brothers like brothers and sisters for Congress.com.
Thank you.
Sure. You sound like the perfect kind of person that needs to be in Congress, quite frankly. Uh, you're a real person.
You're gonna vote for me? I'm
Oh
kidding.
yeah, I'm in
Wow.
college, but I'll vote for you. Um, yeah, you're a real person. You're someone who's, you know, lived the life of, quite frankly, the average American. Your story sounds like, most people in America, right? And we need more people like you in Congress that have had those real struggles and the real problems that most Americans have, right?
I'm
And
definitely not a
you're
multi running
yeah,
for. I am. I I pay my bills like everybody else.
And
yeah,
what I
we
really pick up
that.
on is that You received the letter from me on behalf of the ASBL that we are sending to everybody we can find who a Democrat who's running for office. And we are getting a great reply. We are getting a great percentage of folks like you, candidates like you, saying, tell me more. This is amazing. I either know some of it or I didn't know any of it. We're not getting a reply from every single one. So you've already qualified just by replying to us as the lights are on. Jen knows what's going on. And then the
Yeah.
things you said back, echoing and reinforcing and acknowledging the importance of everything Lloyd talked about at the top of the show. And much of that, some of that is already on your website, talking about fighting for small businesses, women owned businesses, minority businesses. And Lloyd, I just wanted you to hear all that too, because I was just looking at Jen's sites. So this really is a great meeting of the minds here.
Yeah, and that stuff was on there well before we even spoke. So
Mhm.
it's not, this isn't for show. This is really what I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for the everyday American. I'm fighting for people to have the American dream that I grew up with. You know, it was always a dream to own your own business and be your own boss. And for many, that reality comes true, but it's hard. I have people, I posted a video on one of my social media accounts and mentioned something about small businesses. And one of the commenters commented on there that she owns a small business, or it wasn't even about small businesses. No, it was about the removal of SNAP, or, well, actually, the reduction of SNAP benefit funding through the act that's going through Congress right now. Hopefully, it doesn't pass. But with that, she was a small business owner. She said that she had taken a personal pay cut where she's paying herself less than minimum wage to ensure that she could pay her employees minimum wage. And in addition to all of that, she had a food pantry to in her business, just where she personally donated food to it so they could go and get their, like, the employees could come in and get food so they would have enough food to eat to be able to come to work. So it's, and that's not an uncommon thing right now with employers.
You know,
So
I saw an article the other day that said military families are having significant food shortages. Military families.
yeah, yeah.
Crazy. From what you say about your district, whoever's the guy now, not doing a very good job for the people.
You cannot talk to Dan Mueser. You can't call his office. They're rude. They won't email you back. If you do talk to them, they are rude. And that is problematic. He's not holding town halls like he should. I mean, as a representative, it's your responsibility to hold town halls. You have to keep a connection with
Exactly.
the people that you are governing. And you're not, you're in a leadership position, but the people are who you should have in mind every time you make a decision. And we don't have that right now. And I'm fighting for that. I mean, I'm fighting not only by coming on podcasts like yours, I'm fighting by going out and protesting. We're writing letters. We have campaigns to try to get him to listen. And he's just not doing it. And you know what? If he's not going to do the job, I will. That's how this works. I've taken responsibility in several different vocations. And at this point, somebody needs to step up, and I have the qualifications to do it. I have the background, I have integrity, and there's a lot to it, but that's enough for a start.
I like the phrase, if he's not going to do the job, I will.
I will.
You should have little buttons with that on there. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, if he's not holding town halls and he's hard to get a hold of, how can he represent the people of your district? He can't, right?
No.
He can't. Here's
And
something that I would like to share with anyone like yourself running against a Republican. So uh, I have a lot of facts. I don't have that many opinions, but I have a lot of facts, okay? Um, Ronald Reagan. So again, 99.9% of all companies are small businesses. The only agency to help those companies is the Small Business Administration. And the Small Business Act is the largest economic stimulus program in history. Ronald Reagan tried to close the SBA, just try to shut it down. Bush Jr. tried to do the same thing. Bush Jr. cut the SBA budget staff in half. And when Trump was elected, the SBA had the lowest budget in history, and he cut it again. And now he's cut it even further. So Republicans are documentably, irrefutably anti-small business. If you're trying to end uh, federal programs for small businesses and close the only agency to help them, you're anti-small business. Now, here's something that people might disagree with, but again, 99.9% of all U.S. firms are small business. In my opinion, if you're anti-small business, you're anti-American. I think that goes without saying. But yeah, Republicans are anti-small business. In your district, I would bet that, like it's the same as the national statistic, the 99.9% of small businesses, right? Most people in your district, either own or work in a small business. And this Republican member of Congress, they're anti-small business, right?
And see,
Uh,
I think the people that identify as Republican, I do not think they hold that same value. I think many of them, many of our small businesses here are owned by persons that identify as Republican. But
Now,
I think with my candidacy, I think they're going to hear my support for their business and start thinking, "Oh, wait, maybe I should vote for her because she has my best interest in mind." There is some indoctrination that comes into play with how you identify, like your political party identification, but that doesn't always translate to your vote. So, if you're Republican or Democrat, vote for me. I'm still going to try to protect you. But
now,
like you said, it is going against their own personal benefit if they do own a small business and they are voting Republican.
yeah, when you look at the last 50 years, um, Republicans have never ever passed one piece of legislation specifically to benefit the 99.9% of all of U.S. firms that are small businesses. Republican think tanks, conservative publications, they're all anti-small business. I think it's the Cato Institute or the American Heritage Foundation, or both of them, I think, have put articles out for, gosh, 30 years that the SBA needs to be closed. By the way, the funny thing is they'll say it needs to be closed to make government more efficient. And that's at the same time they want to close this little tiny agency to make it more efficient. Trillions of dollars are missing at the Pentagon.
Mm-hmm.
Trillions, trillions.
Well, they're
And,
also
and that's fine. They're okay with that. But we gotta shut down the SBA, right? But yeah, Republicans
they're government
again
contract.
are anti-small business.
Jen, say that again.
I said we're shutting down the SBA, but we're giving all our governmental contracts to Elon Musk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
his kind. Yeah.
I'll tell you.
We
Oh, go ahead, Bruce.
but just Jen, just to bring it into, very, very sharp kind of laser focus, what Lloyd, and really Lloyd alone, has done has lived the adventures, the legal battles to find and try to teach everyone that the SBA is responsible for ensuring that 23% of all federal contracts should be going to small businesses. And it's an outrage, it's a discovery. It's controversial to say they falsify compliance with that goal. So, Democrat or Republican, any candidate who would embrace that, go to our site, find the documentation, get convinced so that you dare say those things like we do, and you've got the facts and figures to back it up. It transcends politics.
Yeah.
The Republican small business owners in your district who you can convince that this is so and that you're going to fix it. You're going to make sure with a Herculean effort, it's not a magic wand type of thing, that there'll be an investigation, there'll be an overhaul, there will be the reforms, there will be the hearings that prove that those many contracts have been going to big businesses illegally, really, depriving small businesses of my numbers, my calculation, my research, hundreds of billions of dollars in business every year go to big businesses that should be going to small businesses. The big businesses, they're big. They don't create one new job to perform that work. But if that was poured into our small businesses, like Lloyd added up earlier, that would be 2 or 3 million extra new jobs created every single year, on top of the 2 million jobs that America typically creates every single year. That's why we're excited to talk to you. It's to help you get known by everyone in your district and also around the whole country who cares about small businesses as someone to watch, someone to support, someone to get behind, but also to wake up of all the problems that this country has, and we've got tons of them. Every day you turn on the news, it's a fire hose of bad stories and corruptions and outrages and scandals that could and should be investigated. We're really just another crisis that how do we carve into people's heads that this is the one, the first one you should take action for? It's because the rubber meets the road with job creation, then that would supply the prosperity you just described. People in your district and employers can't pay employees enough to eat well. That sounded just like the millions of teachers all over the country who are buying pencils and paper and whatever else, staplers for their students because the educational systems in their areas don't have the funds to adequately fill a classroom with what's needed there. So
Yeah,
maybe
and
I restated the obvious. Thank you for listening.
to highlight though, I think a lot of individuals don't really realize that their small business could count towards these government contracts. Like, you could think that if you do geographical information science, like the map making, the fancy map making that's on the Google phone, if you were to do that, you're like, oh yeah, I could apply for a government contract. But some of these government contracts actually go to logo creation, they go to maintenance for properties, it goes to small manufacturing. There's some small manufacturing for like aviation parts because they're little, and there are individual companies that have like 10 or 15 people that work in their company, and they make tiny pieces of the aviation part, and then they ship that part out. These are all jobs that could be enveloped into not just the 23%. We're looking at a 33% because we're going to fight to push that number up. So let's fight for the 33% of people that could have job creation.
Absolutely. I'll tell you something that's a big mistake people make. People think, okay, I've got a barber shop. I can't government contracts. So why do I care about Lloyd Chapman, Bruce Torres, the American Small Business League? It's because the Small Business Act is the largest economic stimulus program for the middle class in history, the largest in history. And everybody in the country would benefit. The whole country, the economy, everything would benefit, right? But again, people don't understand that the Small Business Act is an economic stimulus program for everybody. If you're a policeman in Florida, it's going to benefit you. You're a school teacher in Montana, right?
Mhm.
Or working at a drugstore in Pennsylvania, it's going to benefit everybody. And it was designed, to do that. But people don't understand. They think, okay, I can't get a government contract, so I don't really care. No, it's the largest economic stimulus program
All
for
right.
the people in history, and it's
I'm glad
very
you just said, Lloyd, you and I talk every day for the last 6 or 8 months now. I've been on the job for about 4 months. You just helped me understand something that I hadn't before, which is exactly that barber's example, because of the fact that the contracts going where they should creates all those extra millions of new jobs in presumably everybody's district and town. That's a lot more heads for that barber to cut.
sure.
It's just
If
so booming all around.
it's if the government were to actually give small businesses 23%, legitimate small business with 100 employees or less, 23% of the entire federal acquisition budget, that would be around $350 billion a year into the middle class. That would be just, it's huge, huge.
Yep.
It would have a
Yep.
huge impact on the economy, right? For decades. When you think back on TARP, that was like, what was that, 2008, right?
Mhm.
TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the money went to banks. Again, it was supposed to be economic stimulus program, but it went to banks. Banks don't create jobs, small business do, right? But
Yep.
stuff that drives me nuts, by the way, was watching Trump talking about, I want jobs, jobs, jobs.
Mhm.
Trump, small business create 98% of all net new jobs. What he's doing with the tariffs, that's not going to create jobs, right? It'd be much more effective. He wants to create jobs, would be to expand the Small Business Administration, expand federal programs for small businesses, right? Direct more federal infrastructure spending to small business. That would be the simplest way. But he's crashing the economy with this this tariff thing. Under the guise of creating jobs, it's not going to create jobs, right?
No, tariffs are just to create havoc. That's what tariffs are for. They are to create economic havoc. And honestly, I think I have conspiracies I can't really like speak on, but it's not to create jobs. And
No,
it's hurting the middle and lower class more than that. Like take for example, the push for pharmaceutical tariffs. You know, if you tariff pharmaceuticals, already we have 1 in 5 Americans that have to choose between buying their weekly medication or eating for that week. We
yeah.
already have that economic divide. It's 1.7 million Americans. And if we tariff that, that just increases their cost. It doesn't give them anything. Giving jobs by having a foundation built through the SBA is so much better. It's going to increase the economy. I agree with you. It's going to increase the economy and it's going to have a stimulus effect that we're not going to see from tariffs, even in a 10-year span.
We're going to continually refine the 6, 7, 8 bullet points for a candidate like you, Jenn, to teach your constituents what what should be going on with the contracts. What should the SBA be focused on? How should it be reformed? And what should it properly be known to do? There's a whole propaganda success where I think if you ask most Americans, what does the SBA do? They would say loans. They help you get loans for your small business,
The
or they
very
give,
small part of what they do. Little
right,
Yeah.
tiny part
or
of
they
what they
give
do.
you coaching for sales and marketing and website creation and things
Uh,
like that. Right. It's how the priority thing, Lloyd, right, ought to be making sure that those contracts go to small businesses, right?
You know what, Jen? Uh, Google Fortune 500 firms get small business contracts to see what pops up. I'm in my home office, and on the left wall, it's covered in newspaper stories about my campaign to end fraud in federal small business programs from every major newspaper in the country. Every major, the Chronicle, the Rocky Mountain News, the Arizona Daily Star, the Miami Herald, the San Jose Mercury News, right? It's gone on for 25 years, right? But yeah, the Trump thing, it's crazy that not everybody understands tariffs are going to raise your cost. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to pay more. It's already coming in. I was at Walmart, so they're raising prices, right? Subaru's going to raise prices. So the notion that it's not going to increase cost of American people is just insane, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it drives me nuts that they watch television and people talk about jobs. Not one person has ever said, "Oh, by the way, small business create 98% of all net new jobs."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gosh,
and we
we'll
could brainstorm
that.
also about just electoral success. You know, Jen, you and I talked a little bit on the phone about some heroes and tactics like trying to meet and shake the hands of every potential voter and literally ask for their vote. See what they say. The worst they'll say is, "Oh, I'll think about it." But come election day, you know, a lot of American history proves, dag blame it. I told her I'd vote for her. I got to
That's
vote for her.
they
Yeah.
Wait, you broke up. What? What?
I said that's not the worst thing they'll say to me, but okay.
Now,
Well,
They
here we
I
are.
think I think one of the most important things you can do to be elected to Congress is educate your constituents because they don't know that 99.9% of U.S. firms are small businesses. They don't know that 90% of U.S. firms have 100 employees or less. They don't know that small business create 90% net new jobs. And they don't know that every Republican president in history is trying to close the SBA and end programs for small businesses while they're giving tax cuts to billionaires and Fortune 500 firms. By the way, here's something. In 2023, the Government Accountability Office put out a study that said 34% of the largest, most profitable corporations in America pay zero federal income tax.
Yeah, it's disgusting. That's
Oh
awful.
my God. And nobody knows. Nobody knows because when you look at television and even almost all media is a business to sell advertising.
Yeah.
And who buys ads on national television? Fortune 500 firms. So, CNN, ABC, NBC, CBS, they're actually stories about the fact that Fortune 500 firms haven't created one net new job since, 1980, and that they don't 34% pay no taxes. Oh, and they get 97% of all federal contracts. So the top 1% that doesn't create jobs, that doesn't pay taxes, that's who's getting all of our tax dollars. That's a formula for complete economic collapse. If America continues to give, the vast majority of our contracts to a segment, a tiny segment that doesn't create jobs, doesn't pay taxes, I think it's going to cause a dramatic economic collapse. I don't
I
see how it cannot do that.
it's not just an economic collapse either. It is a social collapse because it removes things from our communities. We have, like, here in my area, we have a small grocery store. It's called Marty's, and you can go in there and you can talk to the owner, and Walmart can come in, build a big corporate thing, knock him out because they can shift their finances more than he can, but we just lost a community spot. Or if you go, say, to the hardware store, you have a choice of the big box hardware store, or we can go see Bruce over in he's in one of the towns near here. There's a guy named Bruce, and he has a store,
Yeah.
and go in there and he knows everything about every single part that you could imagine, and he can show you in that store where it's at.
Hmm.
And I think it's in Nicholson. Yeah, it's in Nicholson. It's Nicholson Lumber. But he can show you everywhere there what he has, how the things go together, and you can fix whatever you need. But when you have the big box stores that come in, they devastate areas. They may create, 100 jobs, but they're destroying your community. Those pieces of your community that you can go and say, "Oh, I know so and so owns this salon. So and so owns this restaurant. I sat down with Heather the other day at her cafe." Like, it takes away from us. And we need the community, especially in times like now where there's a lot of hope lost in America.
Hmm.
And because of those flashes, because of our economic decline, we're losing hope, and we need our community to help uplift us.
We're going to target another 5 or 10 minutes here. So both of you think about what you want to ask each other and what points you want to make that maybe we haven't heard yet.
All right,
Uh,
I've got one for Jen. Half the people in your district are women. Women have never gotten 5% of the contracts. Women pay their taxes. Why are all the contracts going to men? So I would educate the women in your district that women, with this guy in the district, women are not being represented, and I think they're being cheated. Quite frankly, if I went to a federal judge, I think he would agree with me that giving 95% of contracts to companies owned by men would be a violation of the Civil Rights Act. How can you how could you possibly say, oh, well, that's because of this, right? It's got to be discrimination.
There
But
is
go
there's
ahead.
justification for 50% and only being guaranteed 5. That is blatantly a disregard for the population. It's just like the percentage of small businesses versus the percentage of corporate entities that are getting the contracts. There is some sort of discrimination there, and it's not because of the costs of parts. I know that's a lie that they try to tell people. It's not anything like that, because there are small businesses where you don't have pieces and parts you have to buy. I mentioned geographical information science because I know my ex-husband actually does geographical information science as a subcontractor for the federal government. So
Oh,
he does that, and he gained that contract. So he is part of the percentage, part of that 23% where he works
yeah,
under a government contract. But there are so many jobs like that are just technical positions that you could have workforce trainings on. You could gain that as an individual without a lot of cost. So
absolutely.
it's not pieces and parts. There's
Well,
just We know that there's discrimination because the numbers don't math.
Lloyd,
Never.
how hard or how easy should it be for small businesses to learn what to do to apply to be qualified for federal contracts?
Should be on the SBA's website,
Well, I'll
right?
tell you what, I've clicked into that and I get lost in too many websites. It's not a crystal clear path at
Yeah.
all.
I'll tell you something that people don't realize is the Small Business Administration is not there to help small businesses. That's not their mission. They're there to make it look like the government is trying to help small businesses while they're trying to suppress the programs, right? Um, in 2005, the SBA Inspector General put out report 515 and said this. That was what was 20 years ago? One of the largest challenges facing the small business administration and the entire federal government today is that large businesses are receiving small business procurement awards and agencies are receiving credit for these awards. It was 20 years ago. And I believe that was uh, listed as the number one challenge for like a decade, right? But yeah, the Small Business Administration is not really there to help people. Quite frankly, I've sued them a lot. I've sued them a lot, right? And my opinion is that the SBA is run by the Pentagon. When you look at all the key positions historically, they're Pentagon guys, right? So there was a guy at the SBA, he retired or left a few years ago. His name was Terry Sutherland. And he was a retired naval commander whose specialty was surface weapons warfare systems. Why was he the spokesman for the Small Business Administration? He was there for about a decade, right? But when you look at the key SBA people in the last 15, 20 years, you see a lot of these high-ranking Pentagon people.
Now, can I put that in a context? The
Yeah,
federal government is the world's biggest purchaser of goods and services.
right,
And half of what the federal government spends is through and on behalf of the Department of Defense.
right.
So if 97% of federal contracts are going to huge businesses, easily half are through the pipelines and funnels of the DoD and the Pentagon, which absolutely makes the point you just made, proves the point you just made,
Yeah.
that they
What,
would control that contracting and everything about it, especially the Small Business
yeah.
Administration.
What proves the fact that the government's lying and the SBA is not helping small businesses is this.
Lloyd's
I've done
holding
this
up the
110
document that's
times.
completely blocked out and redacted.
Yeah. I've done this 110 times, and they do not want you to know who they're giving the contracts to. Why not, right? Why don't you brag about it? Put it up on the internet, right? Oh, gosh.
And they would if they were legitimate small
Yeah.
businesses on that piece of paper.
Here's a quote from Judge William Alsop in San Francisco Federal District Court. He said, the purpose of the Freedom of Information Act so the public can see how our government works. Congress passed this law so small businesses could have access to these contracts, and here's the United States covering it up. That's the federal district judge said that. He also, in this case, accused the Justice Department and the Pentagon of presenting documents to the court that were false and misleading. Uh, I had the acting inspector general for the SBA, and I had a conversation 15 years ago. His last name was McClintock. And he told me the government's entire small business program is smoke and mirrors. He told me that 15 years ago, right? But again,
What was his
anybody,
position? What was his position?
he was the acting inspector general for the Small Business Administration about 15 years ago. I can't even remember his last name was McClintock, right? But I used to meet with the SBA Inspector General all the time. They would launch investigations based on my research, right? Uh, Jan, the first investigation into fraud failed small business program was prompted by my information. That was in 2002. The Government Accountability Office investigated this. They looked at the SBA's database of small businesses called ProNet, and they found 5,324 are the largest companies on earth were in the SBA database of small businesses. The biggest companies, not just America, but around the world. I remember Thales, which is a very large French aerospace contractor, they were listed as a small business. I remember Disneyland, Honda, Office Depot, every Fortune 500 firm, by the way, was listed as a small business. Every one of them, every single one of them.
Unbelievable. Well,
That.
But
this is this, Jen. I'm sorry. Repeat that.
they're not small.
No, no, they're
No,
one
but
of the
what
biggest companies in the world.
that
Right?
is why, Jen, we are so excited to find a candidate like you to challenge you to get convinced about every single thing we're saying, and then challenge you to experiment. You've got your own priorities. You've got a game plan. You were a candidate before you met us. It's presumptuous of us to think that, oh, this is going to be the first thing Jen now talks about and campaigns on. So, in the last few minutes here, tell us just authentically what are the major reasons that you're running, the major promises that you're making your district, and how do you honestly see starting to bring some of our talking points into your campaign?
I mean, to be quite honest, one of my biggest campaign promises is just to be open and available to to my constituents, to the people in my district, not the people that are giving me money, to all the people in the district that need a voice in Congress that we're not receiving right now.
Let me tell you something. You just inspired me to run because I thought I could do that and I could do that with joy. But go ahead.
Yes,
No
you
joke.
could.
You do that, Bruce.
But I mean, additionally, we need to make sure that we strengthen all sectors. You know, we need our infrastructure strengthened. We need our education strengthened. Teachers should not be paying for their school supplies out of pocket. They should be able to come to work and earn their paycheck and be able to afford normal life after work. We need to strengthen our healthcare, but also do that in a way that is effectively helping small businesses, because you can't just go in and say, oh, universal healthcare, here you go, you got to pay this much more tax money. You know, we have to do that in a realistic way. We also need to increase pay for working class individuals. And again, we can't just go in and slash with a chainsaw. We have to go in and be mindful about how we enact policy to increase the minimum wage and wages that can be used in small businesses. And then also strengthen our connection with small businesses, grow our communities back, because it's vital to have community. There are so many benefits to having a working, functioning community where you know your neighbors, where you know who owns the restaurant you're going into. There are so many positive benefits to that that include not only the socio and economic instances, but also it's a reduction of crime. So we need to make sure that we're doing all of these things mindfully and with purpose. And that's really what I'm promising the American people, the Pennsylvania people that are going to be voting for me, is that I'm coming into this with mindfulness. I'm doing the research. I'm seeing that 23% out of 90%, 99%, it's insanity. And we need to make every piece of our life needs to be fairer. It needs to be fairer for diversity, and that's with DEI. DEI is a whole other subset, but DEI is just giving jobs to people who are qualified to have them, regardless of what their gender, their race, what their sexual identity is. We are giving jobs to people who are qualified, and you know, it's vastly important. These are the promises I'm making to the American people. And these are things that have all impacted me personally. So there's no way I'm not going to fight for these things.
That's
Thank
great,
you.
Jim. We sure need more people like you. We need more people like you. There shouldn't be any Republican small business owners. It's just a fact. Again, it's not an opinion. Just look it up, right? It's on our website. I've got TV news programs from 1985 from CBS, I think, and ABC, where Reagan's trying to close the SBA. You can Google Bush Jr. trying to close the SBA, right? There's an article on the internet called "Does Donald Trump Hate Small Business Because He Keeps Cutting the Budget for the SBA?" So there should be no Republican small business owners or employees, in your district, right? By the way, women, there should be no Republican women. Republicans, what have they done for women? Nothing, nothing ever, right? By the way, Trump cut federal contracts to minorities his first week in office from
Yeah.
15% to 5%. That's going to cost America 1 million jobs a year. That's
Mhm.
going to put thousands of minority companies out across the country out of business. So women should be Republican, minorities should be Republican, and small business owners and employers should be Republican, right? So educate them on that topic, Jan.
They at least need to vote for me, because
Yeah, vote for
they can vote
Jen.
for a
If you're
Democrat.
a small business owner, American Small Business says vote for Jen.
Yes.
And Jenn, tell us your website again where folks can learn all about you.
It's Jenn Brothers for Congress.com. That's JENN Brothers, FOR Congress.com.
And Lloyd, where can people learn about you and the ASBL?
Oh, uh, ASBL.com, LloydChapman.com. Type in Lloyd Chapman Pentagon, see what pops up.
And also follow Lloyd on X, and that's a
Yeah, follow
whole
me on
other
X.
world of worth knowing about how Lloyd is
Uh,
censored on X, but we're not going to open that can right now.
Jen, the last time I sued the Pentagon, they had to write me a check for $500,000.
What
They
was
weren't
your
happy.
time you sued them?
They weren't happy.
Jen, what was your question?
What was your favorite time you sued the Pentagon?
I think the first time that was in 1990, something like that. I
Mhm.
sued the Pentagon in around 1989, and I went to court around 91, and it was in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco. And the attorneys for the Pentagon were there, and the judges were so angry with them, they were just screaming at them. One of them started crying like a baby in federal court, right? But
Mhm.
that was my favorite time. Yeah, there was five judges on a big pedestal screaming at these people, saying you should be helping, these people, not defending the defense contractors, right?
And
And that was very empowering. I walked down the hallway and one of these government attorneys came out crying, and I thought, yeah, I won.
I mean,
Anyway, that's my favorite time. That was 1991, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
I used to joke that my job was to make my boss cry. So I,
All righty. Jen, thank you very much for joining us. Stay in touch. We'll be in touch with you.
Thanks
And
again. You're great. You're great. We need you.
it was wonderful to meet you.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank everybody for watching and listening today.